Hey everyone, my name is Yael Simon, and this is the first of three presentations on an article written by Alexandra Siegel in 2018 called Online Hate Speech. And my presentation is going to focus on the first four sections of the article. So the first section is the introduction, and then a section called Defining Online Hate Speech, and then we're going to go into detecting online hate speech and the producers of online hate speech. So I'm just going to jump right into the introduction, which talks about how hate speech is becoming increasingly visible in mainstream social media. So the author of this article sets the scene by explaining that governments worldwide are passing regulations and pressuring social media companies to implement policies to stop the spread of online hate speech. So we can see that the author is working with a couple of premises. First off, there's a lack of available information. So just to understand that surprisingly little is known about the prevalence, the causes, and the consequences of different forms of harmful language across diverse platforms. We're going to talk about how a lot of the data is only coming from a couple of platforms. We can also talk about how there are limitations to the current approaches in the way that the approaches define and detect online hate speech. And we're also going to talk about how hateful speech is harmful. This is not an article about the Constitution or its amendments. It's an article about the phenomena of hate speech and how we're trying to locate it and stop the spread. So the first section of the body of the article deals with defining online hate speech. And there is no one single agreed upon definition, which makes it very difficult to study. The author quotes another study that explains how social scientists have studied the causes, the harms, and the responses to hate speech, but they're more worried about its effects than systematically defining the terms across borders. The most common definition is, and I'm going to read right off the slide here, is bias motivated, hostile, and malicious language that's targeted at a person or group because of their actual or perceived innate characteristics. And a lot of people have this attitude regarding hate speech of, I know it when I see it. But this is falling short, because how can we systematically study something that we're defining in an array of ways? So different scientific literature has different definitions. Some have a more narrow definition that it must be dangerous speech and language that is more directly linked to the incitement of mass violence or physical harm. Others have a more broad definition that hate speech is just directed against an easily identifiable individual or group based on arbitrary or normatively irrelevant features. So this next slide I have just to show that YouTube, Twitter, the European Union, I mean, everyone's got a different definition. And it's important to realize that you cannot fight what you cannot define. Effective means of combating online hate speech remains somewhat clouded by definitional ambiguity. Because everyone's got a different definition, it's hard across borders to fight it. So the next section, the author talks about detecting online hate speech. So let's go into that. One way is the dictionary-based method, which I'm going to show you how it works from my own personal experience. So the dictionary-based method I'm able to do in 3 steps and in a couple of seconds on Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. And what you can do is you can take your sentence and put it in a column. So A2 and A3, we have 2 sentences. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, and actions speak louder than words. And what we want to do is detect whether or not the word apple is in these sentences. So there's a really quick formula to find it. What you do is you write equals is number, search, and then you put B2, which is the cell of the word you're trying to find, comma A2, which is the sentence that you're looking for. And then all you do, enter, it'll tell you, it'll say true, an apple is in the sentence, or false, apple is not in the sentence. And this is only helpful on a very basic level. And people have started using code words. They've started misspelling and they've started misspelling slurs on purpose. And these really basic algorithms can't find it until they're programmed to find the misspelling. So it does get a little more complex. The paper goes through and names a couple of, more complex ways that hate speech can be detected. It talks about decision trees, like I talked about in my other presentation, and it all boils back to the lack of definition that we were talking about, as well as the lack of diversity in research. So diverse types of hate speech haven't really been studied, and most of the data is from Twitter. But if we look at the producers of online hate speech, which is the next section, we can see that often there are two steps in the creation of online hate speech, and the whole section can be summed up on the next slide in two steps. One, these people will spread hate speech, and then they'll be banned from mainstream media platforms. But then they'll proceed to create or use alternative methods. Take, for instance, the KKK. The organization itself isn't outright publicizing its actions on Facebook and Twitter, but the KKK website takes 5 seconds and an internet connection to find. So they are creating and using alternative methods, and they are not being, no one is monitoring them. So that's the end of these sections. The link to the article is here, as well as my email address for any questions. Thank you, and I'll see you in class.